key characteristics of any civilization rests in the degree of social organization. And social organization is often characterized by defining who's included and who's excluded from a particular society. So in this video, we'll be talking about the concept of the one-other split, the role played by the other in world history, and the concept of Orientalism as defined by Edward Said. So concepts of otherness have been an important part of world history since the earliest civilizations, because social organization in the ancient world was primarily based on family. Nuclear families were organized into extended families into clans, and clans into tribes. So tribalism then became defined by family. And it was this psychological phenomenon, or psychosocial phenomenon, that focused on loyalty and commitment to one's own tribe. It's easy to understand why, because tribalism and loyalty to your own tribe is essential to survival. There was safety in numbers, and this way in which belonging to a group could ensure your own protection. Everyone contributes, everyone receives, and in the event that one of the members experiences a disaster, say for example the death of a family member, other members of the tribe could ensure their survival. But the downside of tribalism, it comes with the exclusion of the other, the people who don't belong to the tribe. This exclusion could lead to a lack of contact, lack of understanding, suspicion, animosity, even violence. And tribalism, concepts of tribalism and the other, continue to underwrite the modern world to this very day. Just think about all the social categories that exist in the modern world. Things like race, gender, age, class, ethnicity, citizenship status, sexuality. The list goes on. And it divides people in societies into categories. It divides them into a split known as the one-other divide. We and they, us and them. And this one-other split is characterized by a hierarchy in which one group is understood to be superior to the other group. It's characterized by stereotyping, by a mistrust of difference, and it has profound consequences. You see tribalism and the concept of the other in warfare, in religious strife, in racism, in imperialism, in nativism and anti-immigrant sentiment, and others. So in this video, we're going to dig into one of the categories of othering called Orientalism. Orientalism was a concept developed by a scholar named Edward Said. And Said argued that Orientalism was a worldview that imagined, emphasized, exaggerated, and distorted the differences between Asian and North African people as compared to the people of Europe and the United States. Said argues that Europe constructed the so-called Orient, or the East, which he meant as the people of Asia and North Africa, in ways that presented the so-called Orient as exotic, backwards, uncivilized, and at times dangerous. So Orientalism then, according to Edward Said, was a man-made discourse at the center of a Eurocentric worldview or paradigm. So let's talk about that definition. A couple of key terms. One is discourse. Discourse is just basically the way that people talk about and understand the world around them. It's made up of the words, symbols, images, and ideas that they use to structure the way they see the world. Because language is the core of communication, language is at the core of human connection. Human connection is at the core of history. And so discourse is a way in which people structure the world around them. The other key term that we used in that definition was paradigm. And paradigm is just a framework for a way of thinking about the world. It's often referred to as a worldview that's shared by a large group of people. It includes the perceptions, emotions, and beliefs that a culture share. So what happens in Orientalism, according to Said, is that language, that discourse, the words, symbols, images, and ideas that we use to structure the world around us. Discourse divided the world into West and East. This is often referred to as the West and the rest phenomenon. There was Europe, and then there was everyone that was not Europe. The West, known as the Occident, constructed the East, or the Orient, in a way that made the East appear different and inferior, and therefore in need of Western intervention or saving. They presented Asian and North African cultures as undeveloped and unchanging, uncivilized, in need of advancement. And implicit in this definition is the idea that the West, or the Occident, was everything that the East, or the Orient, was not. So where the East was understood to be backwards, the West was understood to be advanced. Where the East was understood to be uncivilized or barbarous, the West was understood to be civilized. What this means, in other words, is that the West constructed the East as its opposite. And it constructed the East in an opposite fashion in a way that made the West better than the East. This could be used to justify many things, including racism and imperialism. But it also created a fascination with the exotic and the Oriental that permeated European and American cultures in the middle of the 18th and early 19th centuries. You can see it in art, such as this art created by European artists in the 18th, 19th, and early 20th centuries that depicted the Arab world as an exotic and mysterious place of sand, harems, belly dancers, everything that the West was not. You see it in literature. 1001 Nights, also known as the Arabian Nights, was one of the best sellers after it was translated into French and English in the early 18th century. In 1821, Thomas de Quincey's Confessions of an English Opium Eater hit marketplaces, as had the 1810 Curse of Kahana and the 1817 The Revolt of Islam. So this focus on the Orient permeated literature as well. You can see it in architecture, such as the Foire de Caire, the Brighton Pavilion, and the Medical College of Virginia, which all display Egyptian influences. Or in other forms of popular culture like these postcards. France, for example, colonized Algeria in North Africa from 1830 to 1962. And from roughly 1900 to 1930, French entrepreneurs produced hundreds of postcards of Algerian women that were circulated in France. So imagine, if you will, if you go into a museum gift shop and you see the spindles of all of these postcards. This is the model of what they were doing with these early 20th century postcards of Algerian women. And while the Algerian women were portrayed as being sort of in the middle of their real lives, it looks in these postcards as if the camera was capturing them just in an everyday situation. In reality, they were posed in a photographer's studio, set up to emphasize concepts of difference and to present an exotic picture of Algeria to the French audience. As demonstrated in Malek Alula's The Colonial Harem, these postcards, as they were circulated, emphasized the idea of these women as exotic, different, and in need of saving. So this focus on Orientalism and difference would come to underwrite the 19th century approach to new imperialism, as Europe felt that it was their duty to civilize the barbarous people of Africa and Asia, and to bring more advanced civilization, more advanced culture into these so-called backward regions. Thank you.